What is going on, everybody? Austin here, and I just got really loud peaks on my recording, so I hope that's not super crazy loud, but you will be the ones to judge. This right here is episode 4 of the podcast that I'm currently recording. I did record another episode 4, but I'm not sure if I like it enough to keep it, so we're going to call this one episode 4 and see what happens. But you will know whether or not this is actually 5 or 4, and if the next one even makes it to YouTube or not. So stay tuned for that exciting news. First thing I want to say now that this is episode 4 is that the first 3 recordings that I made were made without actually uploading a video. So I didn't upload any of them. I just recorded all 3 because I wanted to have a bit of a bank to dig into. And that was good to do. I think that was a nice little experiment, just to record 3, have no feedback, just go with it, see what happens. And I got, surprisingly for me, a lot of really positive feedback. I don't know if a lot. I got some positive feedback, so thank you very much to people who gave me some positive feedback. I got a few Facebook messages, some texts, people just who I was speaking to saying, yeah, I really enjoyed it. So it seems to me that there are some people out there who are listening to the podcast who enjoy them, which is great. Thank you very much. I appreciate the positive words of encouragement, and I didn't honestly expect that. I thought that I would just be uploading these for fun, something to do during quarantine, a little experiment for me to kind of practice throwing ideas around the room. But if people are listening to it and getting something out of it, that's great. I'm not really interested in getting hundreds or thousands of views on these podcasts. I'm not really interested in doing them for very long. It really is just a quarantine project for me. But if there is some benefit to be had, that's fantastic. So once again, thanks for the encouragement. It really does let me know that it's worth publishing these, uploading them to YouTube and so forth, rather than just taking some time out of my day to talk to myself in my room, which I do anyways. But now I'm just deciding to record those instead. And the positive feedback is enough to tell me that that's worth doing. If you don't know what the show is, go ahead and check out episode 1. You go ahead and do that. There, I describe what the show is, the title, where it comes from, the previous version of the show that existed a couple of years ago as a radio show, and neat, cool stuff like that. So I won't bore you with introductions here. On the point of positive feedback, I received a message from somebody who was listening to the show. He said he really enjoyed it, and I asked him, I said, thanks very much. What would you like me to talk about next episode? And he said, the Afterlife. And I thought, that's great, because that's something that's very easy, not complex or complicated in any way, certainly not controversial. I think everybody agrees upon the afterlife. I think everybody knows all the philosophy and ideas and science and theology and metaphysics behind the afterlife. So this should be really easy and simple, short, quick video that nobody will have any problems or objections with. Right. So I thought to myself, since it will be such an easy project, why not go ahead and do a whole bunch of research ahead of time so that I'm not making a fool of myself? But then I kind of stopped myself when I said, this is just a fun little thing I'm doing. I don't want to turn this into a serious project. I'm not going to spend hours and hours working on a podcast that's just something fun for me to do. And if any of you have done editing, you know that editing anything almost always takes longer than filming the thing. So I had a gaming channel in the past, and editing those videos, maybe it was like a 20-minute gameplay commentary. So I'd be playing a video game while talking into a microphone. It might take 25 minutes to half an hour of recording. Let's just say half hour. It took me half an hour to record that video. Well, the amount of time it would take to go into putting the video, putting the audio, putting the special effects, putting in subtitles, putting in the end screen, fades, audio adjustments, light settings, etc., all that editing would then take me at least an hour, right? So for me, the benchmark that I had was whatever amount of time it takes me to record a video, it's going to take me about double to edit. There's a threshold, of course. At some point, if it takes me 8 hours to record a video, it's not going to take me 16 hours to edit it. But I never record anything that long. So usually it would take me about a half an hour to record and an hour or so to edit. For these things, these podcasts, I would like it if that wasn't the case. I would like editing to take as much time or less than the recording time. Now, the recording time on these is averaging about 40 minutes. That seems to be 45 minutes is a decent benchmark. So if it takes me 45 minutes or less to edit these, then I am a happy camper. And it is taking me about a half an hour to 45 minutes to edit these. So that's fantastic news. So all in all, the time it takes to record and then edit and then I click a render and I walk away and do something else. It takes an hour or two to render the video. It takes an hour or two to publish it to YouTube. But I'm not sitting at my computer when that's happening. I'm off doing other things. So really, for me, it takes 45 minutes to an hour. 45 minutes for recording, another 45, let's say, for editing. Let's just keep it simple and say that it takes me 2 hours max to make one of these videos, one of these podcasts. I'm cool with that. But if I were to start doing all kinds of research ahead of time, maybe even creating a kind of script, well then, that would certainly put me into the 3, 4, 5 hour range. And I don't care enough to make this a 4, 5 hour thing. So I haven't done any formal research for this ahead of time. Thought about it, but this is more like, you're just kind of hanging out with me. We're having a little, what do you want to call it? A virtual bev at the pub. This is virtual bevs at the pub with Austin. I might even change the title. Let's call this virtual bevs at the pub at 11 p.m. with me. And that's like the best night you can imagine. Just having bevs at the pub philosophizing with yours truly. So no research has been done ahead of time. However, I have a philosophy degree, so hopefully that helps a little bit in talking about the afterlife. What's interesting about this conversation this topic anyway, this philosophical topic, is I remember, and stereotypically, you talk about the afterlife, so two things tend to go hand in hand historically. The number one is the existence of God, and number two is the immortality of the soul. So, historically speaking, we wouldn't really use the word afterlife for this topic. We would talk about the immortality of the soul. That would be the more traditional term for this conversation we're about to have, this discussion we're having right now. And I remember a prof in university, I think in third year, telling me this, saying that so there was a pope. I don't know which pope. I could find it for you if I were to go look through my notes. I have all my notes from university still in boxes. They're not organized very well, so I would have to. But I know that this is from third year. This is from early modern 1 in the fall semester. So I can go find this for you if you wanted to know what pope it was. But some pope during the early modern period said to all the Christian philosophers and theologians, he said, we need to just right now focus. And this was during the Renaissance. And so during the Renaissance, historically speaking, you have a rise of what might be like the seeds of modern atheism. It wasn't modern atheism during the Renaissance, but you certainly had a new kind of humanism coming out, or a revival of a kind of humanism that was leading into the seeds of a modern atheism. And that's a contentious historical claim, and people might disagree with me, but this was the claim that was happening. This is what my prof was saying. And this pope said, okay, we need people to argue two things. I love the philosophy, I love the theology y'all are doing, it's great, but just focus your time and energy on two questions right now. Number one, the existence of God, and number two, the immortality of the soul. Put your time and energy into that. And they did. You had all kinds of philosophers and theologians writing all kinds of treatises and books, about mostly books, because treatises and articles and things were just starting to become popularized in the late early modern period. So a lot of writing was coming out about this stuff, a lot of philosophizing, and the people who were already doing this philosophizing were excited, and this was a good thing, because people who were theologians and philosophers who were already talking about the existence of God and the immortality of the soul just kept doing what they were doing, and now people were reading their stuff. Good stuff. But you had lots of philosophers and theologians who weren't doing that kind of work. They weren't talking about the immortality of the soul or the existence of God, and now they were. And my prof mentions this and said that he read a book, and again, I could find the title of the book and the author. It's in my notes somewhere if you're interested. And in this book, the person was giving a history of atheism, and I believe, I forget her name, but I believe that she claimed that one of the reasons why, one of the contributing factors to the rise of modern atheism, the rise of contemporary atheism, was these people writing these arguments for the immortality of the soul and the existence of God. Because you had a whole bunch of philosophers and theologians who were good philosophers and good theologians and knew what they were talking about. This was their thing. And so they were already writing that stuff, and that was good philosophy and good theology. But you also had a whole bunch of philosophers and theologians who were mediocre and who weren't as good, and who this wasn't their realm. They might have been philosophers on something else. Maybe they were epistemologists or something else, right? Who knows? But now they were writing about the existence of God and the immortality of the soul. They were out of their realm, but writing about this. And so you had a whole bunch of bad philosophy, essentially, coming out, And there's a lot of it because this is what the Pope wanted. He wanted a lot of people to just write on this. So you got a whole bunch of bad arguments for the existence of God and the immortality of the soul, way more than ever before, because it was now artificial. People weren't just writing about this because they thought that they could do it. They were writing about it because the Pope told them to. Okay, so her claim. This is all hearsay through my prof. So my prof was telling me this, and I'm telling you this. You're 3 degrees removed from this book. And the claim is that that's one of the things that contributed to the rise of modern atheism. People read these arguments and said, these are bad arguments. Who would believe this? This is awful. I'm not gonna believe in God or in the immortality of the soul. What a terrible argument. They read another one. This is also a terrible argument. It just seems like there are only terrible arguments. So all these bad arguments were circulating. This is so I remember my prof was mentioning this as a kind of like I don't want to imply anything that isn't true, but to me it seemed like he was mentioning this as kind of like a jab, as like a point against, like a little stab against Christians, like, you silly Christians, like, you were so silly and stupid, you came up with all these bad arguments and you contributed to the very thing you were trying to prevent. How foolish of you, right? That was the tone he had when he was saying this story. It was kind of like this really low-key, passive-aggressive, like, what a bunch of dumb Christians who were trying to resist atheism by coming up with all kinds of arguments, but their arguments were so bad they actually helped support atheism. And I thought about this later, like months or years later. I was reflecting on that moment, and I thought, in that moment, I remember kind of feeling dumb myself. I'm like, yeah, I guess that was kind of dumb. Like, what a silly mistake, how foolish, like, and I associate myself with these Christian people, like, what? But then I realized months later, I thought, wait a minute, what actually happened in that classroom? What happened was that prof was passing on this claim from this author that the reason why so many people one of the reasons why so many people today are atheists is because of bad arguments. Well, duh. Yeah, I'm cool with that. Like, it seems like he was kind of taking a jab and saying that I'm the dumb one or the Christians are the dumb people, when really all he said was, if you really distill it down, people are atheists because of bad arguments. And I'm totally cool with that. So, needless to say, there are plenty of bad arguments for the afterlife. There are lots of good ones as well. I don't know that I've really looked into too many of them in detail. I think I remember in philosophy of religion in my first year, it was a second year course, I took it in my first year, we read Alvin Plantinga. And I'm pretty sure Plantinga has an article called On the Immortality of the Soul. And I think William James might have one as well. Actually, I got the writings of William James right here. Oh gosh, almost all my books just fell off my shelf. That would have been horrifying. I feel like James wrote on the immortality of the soul as well. Maybe he didn't, though. That doesn't seem like a thing that James would write about, now that I'm saying it out loud. So I'm just reading through the table of contents here. Now, immortality of the soul, that's not really a Jamesian topic. Yeah, I don't see it, so I'm making that up. But I remember reading Plantinga talking about it. I think. I'm trying to put my book back on my shelf, that's why I'm not really talking. Okay. Regardless, I know a little bit about it. One of the things that comes up with this topic is, well, can't you just believe whatever you want? So look at the global... oh no, my mic is making a weird sound. Hang on, let me fix this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, hopefully I fixed it. Look at the global landscape here. So in one part of the world, you have Christians believing that there's an afterlife and there's heaven and there's hell, and you go to, and then purgatory, but everybody ultimately ends up in either heaven or hell for all eternity. You got that conception. Then you have the Muslim conception, which maybe there's paradise and hell. And it's a bit different because how you get into paradise, how you get into hell, there are different rules and different ways of getting to these places. And places, again, we put around quotation marks. I'm sure that some religions and some spiritualities do think that there are actual places. So I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty confident. I don't know. I'm 78% confident that ancient Greek mythologies and religions believed that Hades, the underworld, was under the world. Like, it was a physical location to which your kind of like spirit went and it was almost like a corporeal thing. It had a certain sense of bodiness to it, physicality to it. And then you roamed around Hades, and if you were just one of the mediocre people, you would just roam forever. But if you were one of the greats, then you'd go off to Elysium, where I think it's Elysium, where that's like where all the heroes go. That's where like Alexander the Great is, right? Because he was such a great Greek hero that he just gets, that's like kind of a heaven. Whereas hell is Hades. It's a kind of this place of roaming, and you're kind of, and then once people stop talking about you and they stop singing songs in your name and they stop reading poetry about you, etc., then, or they stop even just telling stories about you, then you just slowly kind of fade away from existence. Whereas Achilles, we're still telling stories about Achilles to this day, so his memory is strong. So his little soul thing, I don't know if we can call it a soul, his corporeal thing, spirit thing, I don't know, in Elysium is partying it up right now because we still remember him, so he's still vivid. There's another conception. You have the Hindu conception with karma and reincarnation, Buddhist and Hindu of breaking out of samsara and entering nirvana. You have Norse mythology of going up to Valhalla. And can't we just say that we all believe different things, and isn't that just fine and dandy? There was a guy at a pub I talked to once who told me that he believed in Valhalla, and that when he dies, he's going to go and drink a mead with Odin and Thor and all this stuff. And I thought, and I said to him, "Why do you think that?" And I kind of wasn't that interested in getting into a philosophical debate with this guy because he had drank way more than I had, number one, so I knew it wasn't going to be that productive. And number two, he just didn't seem like the kind of guy who wanted to get into a deep philosophical debate. The vibe that I got was he just kind of seemed like he wanted to tell me what he believed. He just wanted to talk about what he thought rather than having a discussion. So I didn't care too much about engaging him, but I can't help myself. It's hard not to bite. So I said, "Why do you think that?" And he said, "Well, why not? Why can't I? Like, you believe in God, and you go to heaven or you go to hell. There's afterlife, this kind of thing. Why can't I believe in Valhalla? Why can't I have my shot? Right? You can believe in that. Why can't I believe in this?" It was all this why can't I? Why can't I? And all I did was ask him, "Why do you believe that?" And his answer was, "Why can't I? Like, why not?" So for him, it was more like here's my guess. Maybe I'm psychologizing him, trying to read his mind a bit too much here. But it seemed to me that his reasoning was, well, it would be damn cool if that was the case. I would like that to be the case. And why is anybody going to tell me not? This is a free country. I can believe whatever I want, isn't it? So it seemed kind of more like an emotional, political thing for him, rather than informed by just seeking the truth. I don't know that he woke up one day and went, "Oh my goodness, there's just so much evidence for Valhalla that the Norse people, the Vikings, got it right. Wow. Okay. All right. Let's go to Valhalla." Like, I don't think that's what happened. I think he just thought it was cool, and then here I am at the pub, and he decides, "I'm going to tell this guy I believe in Valhalla." It probably wasn't even as conscious as that. So this guy believed in Valhalla. Oh my gosh, I'm looking at my peaks right now. I think it just blew out the speakers. I hope you guys aren't deaf. I'll fix that in post. So I'll whisper that. So this guy believed in Valhalla, and isn't it cool if we all just believe whatever we want? And the first thing I want to say is no. It's not. I mean, in one sense, it is cool. Like, it's okay in the sense that for many of us, most of our daily activities won't look that different depending on our belief in the afterlife. So, for example, you pick two people driving a car, and so I sit at a stoplight. You say, "Okay, look, there's that red car, there's that blue car. They drove by. Which one of them believes in Valhalla, and which one of them believes in, I don't know, paradise, like an Islamic conception of paradise?" I don't know. Just looking at the people driving the car. Okay. So many things in life are going to be like that. But this is one of those fundamental questions that does matter in the sense that fundamental. It's foundational. It's basic. Everything else is built on top of this. And it matters. I can give you an example of when things really start to matter more than like driving. And by the way, there are lots of religions and cultures that do see driving as something that would be contrary to their religion, and part of that is wrapped up with the afterlife. But regardless, let's take an example of euthanasia. Okay, so this is something that's now growing worldwide. Scandinavia is pushing it like crazy, and not Denmark, Holland. And why am I forgetting the name of this country? The Netherlands. Thank you, whoever said that. The Netherlands is pushing this like crazy. Canada is also ahead of the curve in the sense that we are a country where we're pushing euthanasia very, very quickly. And I think that euthanasia is inherently immoral. It's inherently immoral because it is the intentional killing of an innocent human being, and that should never be done. That's never okay. And yet it's being seen legally okay. It is legally okay in some cases, and those cases are growing. Like, it used to have to meet stricter standards before you could apply for euthanasia. Now those standards are being loosened and loosened, and they're getting looser and looser and looser, so that you have more and more euthanasia. An outlook on the afterlife affects that. So an example would be if what you if what's a simple example? Let's suppose that after you die, nothing happens. Or let's suppose, actually, let's just make two up. I don't want to make this too. Okay, let's suppose that after you die, no matter what, no matter how you die, no matter how you lived, you go to a kind of a paradise. You go to Elysium, right? And you get to drink mead with the gods forever, no matter what happens. Then you might think that euthanasia ain't all that bad, because you might say, well, we're just, hurrying them on to Elysium, right? So go ahead and kill them. And in fact, we should all be committing suicide right now because there's pain in this life, but there's no pain in Elysium. There's no suffering there. So let's just hurry on up to Elysium. That might be one way of looking at it. Whereas if the afterlife, maybe there's there's an Elysium, but maybe there's also the area outside of Elysium where you can just wander until your memory fades away from existence. Then you might say, hang on a second here, I don't want to euthanize this person because they still have time right now in this life. They still have time right now to make their memory worth remembering, to make themselves into a great Achilles-like hero so that they can actually make it into Elysium. Because if we were to euthanize them right now, they won't make it into Elysium. That might be one way of looking at it. This is you might think this is a silly example, but it's just an example to show that what you think about the afterlife does in fact inform what you do here in this life, right? To bring it more down to earth, I think that if you have a very atheistic, scientific, materialist conception of the universe, then this person is suffering. If we kill them, they will cease to exist, so we will end their suffering. They're suffering right now, there's only going to be more suffering. What's the point? Let's just end them. Okay. And all they really are anyway is a clump of cells connected with neurons. So it's not like we're doing anything inherently wrong. We're just turning off a really wet, complicated computer. That might be an atheistic, scientific, materialist conception, whereas a Christian conception would say this is a child of God, this is a creature that has infinite inherent value given to it by its creator, who loves it dearly. And to kill this thing is a direct offense against that gift of life, because this creature is a gift from God, and it's a sacred gift from God, and you don't break, smash, destroy sacred things. You let sacred things exist as they're supposed to, and eventually your sacred pot, or whatever, let's pick something that you hold sacred, even, let's say, the Bible, it's even the book, so a sacred book, right? I would not, I don't even like when I'm organizing my books, and I put them on the floor sometimes, just because it's a nice open space. I won't put my Bibles on the floor, because it's a sacred item. I'm not going to put my Bible on the floor. It just seems wrong. But at some point, all of my Bibles are going to fall apart. Like, literally, the paper, the glue is just not going to be held together anymore. It's going to fall apart. And then at that point, I would, I guess, bury them. That hasn't happened to any of my Bibles, but I suppose at one point I'll be burying a Bible one day, because that just seems like a more sacred way of taking care of a Bible that's no longer useful. I'm not going to throw it into the garbage, because again, that's just kind of throwing it onto a pile of waste. Typically with sacred things, you burn or bury them, and I don't like the idea of burning a Bible, so I'd probably bury it. But again, so it's run its natural course. You bring it to its natural resting place. So with a human, you let it die its natural death, right? You were born naturally. You should die naturally. You don't artificially end that life, because that's not how you treat a sacred thing. So that might be that's one example of how your conception of the afterlife would affect your daily life. So it does actually have really important practical consequences. And this question of practical consequences, I think, matters in the sense that if something has, the more important something is for our lives, the more evidence we should require or the more effort and energy we should put into trying to find out the truth. So it shouldn't just be a matter of, well, I believe in Valhalla and you believe in heaven, so let's just believe whatever we want. Isn't that fine? Not quite. We do that for unimportant things. We don't do that for very important things. So, for example, if someone says to you, hey, you're saying, what movie should I watch tonight? Aladdin or The Little Mermaid? And your friend, who you kind of trust his opinion on movies, you have similar taste, he's a film major, I don't know, something like this, and he says, you should watch Aladdin. It is a better movie than Cinderella. Or what did I say? Little Mermaid. Okay, then are you going to then go do some Google searches about which movie is better? Are you going to again then go read some books and some scholarly articles on which is better? Are you going to go look up the production value and what years they were made? Probably not. You'd probably just watch Aladdin. I know I would. In that scenario, I would just say, okay, I need to watch a movie. It's between Aladdin and The Little Mermaid. I asked my buddy. He said Aladdin. I'm watching Aladdin. It's one of those things that's relatively unimportant. So I'm not going to be super critical and scrutinous about is Aladdin really a better movie than The Little Mermaid? Maybe I would have had a more pleasurable experience watching The Little Mermaid. I'm not worried about it. It's an unimportant decision. But deciding something like, am I going to go into a career in computer science or in civil engineering? Well, if my buddy tells me, yeah, civil engineering is definitely the route to go, you have lots of job opportunities, great benefits, a lot of mobility, there are more opportunities to work from home, it's more fulfilling, things like this. Am I going to do a Google search after that? Am I going to go read some articles? Am I going to go visit some campuses? Am I going to go watch some YouTube videos about civil engineering? Yeah, I probably will. I'll probably do a little bit more research into civil engineering and computer science before I just decide to listen to what my buddy said, civil engineering is better. Because in the case of Aladdin, I'm committing myself to an hour or two watching a cartoon on a Thursday night. In the case of my career, that's like the rest of my life. So if I spend years and years going for a civil engineering degree just because my buddy said I ought to, when really I would have enjoyed computer science a lot more, boy, that would suck. So the bar goes up, essentially. That's what I'm trying to point out here. And in epistemology, which is a branch of philosophy that deals with knowledge and how we know things, in epistemology we call this pragmatic encroachment. Pragmatic encroachment. And pragmatic encroachment is essentially a phenomenon whereby our pragmatic or our practical concerns, what we're concerned with in terms of like our practical life, not just theoretical here, but what actually happens to us, those concerns encroach, they pour over, they step on, they peel over into whether our philosophizing, our considerations, our deliberations, our decision making. To put it another way, pragmatic encroachment changes the bar, the height of the bar you have to pass to decide whether or not you know something. Because again, epistemology is all about knowledge, it's all about knowing. So an example of this, and again, this is coming from my second year, this is a third year epistemology class, and so I could go back into my notes and find this from first semester of second year, maybe it was winter semester of second year epistemology, and get this for you. But there are a couple authors, and they give this example of, suppose you go to a museum. It's a massive museum. It's like the Smithsonian or something, okay? And in this museum, you're walking around, you're reading all the different plaques and seeing all the different artifacts and things. And you come to this massive, old wooden ship. And it's beautiful. And the entire ship is right there in front of you. It's not like a piece of it. It's the whole thing. And you can walk around, and it describes, like, here's where they held the barrels of rum, and here's the mast, and here's the port side, and all these things, and other ship terms that you can tell I'm not a naval enthusiast, and I don't like belly buttons either. And you go to this ship, and at the front of the ship there's a plaque that says, this ship is known as the Italian Morningstar, and it was constructed in 1652 by Venetian merchants who were mainly transporting silks and spices between Venice and Alexandria in Egypt. And it was one of the busiest, most active ships in the 17th century. It ran from its, when it was constructed in 1652 all the way until 1712, and it was extremely lucrative, and it was, it brought in all kinds of bullion for the European merchants, and it was great, and it is still seaworthy to this day. So the plaque ends with that note. This ship, made in 1652, some 300 and something years later, 350 whatever years later, is still seaworthy to this day. And you think to yourself, wow, that's neat. Like, it's a really old ship, and yet if you were to put it on the Mediterranean, it would still sail just fine. That's wild. Like, what an amazing piece of engineering and construction, that is. And then you're talking to your friend later. She asks you, how's your day? You say, it was great. I went to the museum. I saw these swords and artifacts and things. I saw the ship called the Italian Morningstar. And you know it's from 1652, and it's still seaworthy to this day. She'd go, wow, that's crazy. That's like a feat of civil engineering and like an amazing construction. I'd say, yeah, that's what I said, right? Now, you would consider that if you had a list that you were able to write down because you were extremely bored and very patient, and you could write a list of everything you know, on that list that day you would add the Italian Morningstar was a ship constructed in 1652 that is still seaworthy to this day. And that would be one of the things that you know, a bit of knowledge on your list of all the things you know. Now, change the scenario. The scenario now is you are a captain, and your job is to take that Italian Morningstar that was constructed in 1652, and after having read that plaque that says it is still seaworthy to this day, then all of a sudden you have to, for some weird reason, okay, don't just engage the hypothetical for me here, you have to take that ship and 200 souls across the Mediterranean from Venice to Alexandria. That trip that it made however many hundreds or thousands of times. But now you're in charge. You're the captain. You're going to take 200 people on that ship and go across the Mediterranean. The question is, do you know that ship is seaworthy? I don't know about you, but me personally, I would say, well, I would do a test. I want to walk around it a few times. I would want to ask some experts. I would want to consult my knowledge as a captain. Do I really know the ship is seaworthy? Like, I would do some checks. Or at the very end of the day, I'd probably even want to just reject the hypothetical. I would say, is there any way that I can not take this ship across the sea? Because I do not want to be the guy who takes this ship across the Mediterranean, or tries to, and then it sinks and 200 people die because I trusted the word or the authority of a plaque. Right? Like, I don't want to be responsible for a mistake that serious. And it could have been avoided if I had just done some extra steps. But the point is here, the evidence for both scenarios is the same. The experience is the same. The experience is you read a plaque at a museum that you assume the museum people wrote, and it says the ship is still seaworthy. But in the one scenario, where that's just a neat fact that you learned on a Tuesday afternoon while visiting the museum, you believe, you know that that ship is seaworthy. That's something that you add to your list of things you know. That's a piece of knowledge you now have for the rest of your life, or until you forget it. But in the other scenario, where you got to take that ship plus 200 people across the Mediterranean, you don't know. You're not confident in your knowledge. You got to double check. And so this is an example of pragmatic encroachment. Okay, our practical concerns change whether or not we know something. And that's fascinating, because I thought knowledge was knowledge. Either know something or you don't. But here you have the same experience, and yet you don't know in one scenario that the ship is seaworthy, but you do know that it's seaworthy in the other scenario, based on the same evidence. That's so fascinating to me. Now, some ways around it, I suppose you could say, well, actually, you were too hasty in the first scenario to say that you know the Italian Morningstar was seaworthy. You don't. You read it on a plaque, but do you really know that ship is seaworthy? No. So you were actually too hasty going around telling people that you know that ship is seaworthy. Or you can go the other way and say, you should be totally confident taking that ship out to sea and with 200 people on it, because you read that plaque and you know that it's seaworthy. If you know it in the first scenario, you know it in the second one. If you don't know it in the first scenario, you don't know it in the second one. Or if you don't know it in the second one, you don't know it in the first one. It applies to both. And so you avoid this awkward kind of problem of knowing it in one case but not knowing it in the other based on the same evidence. Or you can bring in another kind of a third variable and say, yes, there's things that you know, but then there's confidence in that knowledge. So even if you know something and you double, triple, quadruple check, still you might not be very confident in your knowledge. And that does happen too. So anyway, there are lots of different ways of going about this, and I'm not here to solve the problem of pragmatic encroachment. I'm just here to mention it and say that it is certainly a phenomenon, I think, and it's one that has an explanation, demands an explanation, and I think that we can come up with examples for it. One example, again, is the one I gave earlier of the ice cream. That's an example where the stakes are pretty low, so what you will, as a matter of fact, count as knowledge, like you know that Aladdin is better than the Little Mermaid, is a much lower bar than what you count as knowledge. Like, I know that civil engineering is a better career for me than computer science. You're going to require different kinds and different amounts of evidence because more is at stake for you. When it comes to the question of the afterlife, something similar, I think, happens for many of us. Many of us might say, it's not all that important to me, and so I'm not even going to really think about it or make a decision about it, because who really cares at the end of the day? And so your bar is pretty low. You don't require a lot of evidence. I think for this guy who I was talking to at the pub that one time, his bar must have been pretty low. I think he was probably far more concerned with day-to-day events and activities than he was with what's going to happen to me one day when I die. And for him, it was probably a thought of one day. I think for most of us, it's always a thought of like, well, one day I'm going to die. We don't think it's going to be today, but I mean, people die every day. So, and I think that this whole coronavirus thing reminds us of that. So we don't think about it very often. And so it doesn't seem like it's a pressing issue. It isn't really, we don't really think that we need to deliberate and get a lot of evidence for this, because I'll worry about that when I'm 90. I'll figure it out then. And quite honestly, I just feel kind of sad and scared when I think about it now. So I won't spend time thinking about it now because I don't feel like being sad and scared, right? And again, it's probably not even as conscious as that, but it's just this passing thought where you maybe, you're stargazing one night, or you're sitting in front of the campfire, or you listen to a really powerful emotional song, or you see a movie, and something sparks, and you get to thinking about these topics, and that's when it starts to bug you, because you go, man, I don't want to think about what happens when I die, right? I think I remember this comes up, and I ranted about this a couple episodes ago when I was ranting about agnosticism and how so many times, as the Catechism says, so often it amounts to nothing more than practical atheism. And I remember thinking about this with people I know in my life who are having kids or planning on having kids, and they're this exact kind of agnostic. And so many times that doesn't bother me, because if it's someone I don't really know, then that's just a statistic. That's just a person out there who's an agnostic. I don't really care. But if it's like a close friend or a family member, then I really start to care more because I have more interest in that person. So, for instance, I don't care too much about that kid that's, I don't know, who I saw on the sidewalk 3 weeks ago while I was driving to get the groceries. I mean, I have a certain kind of human Christian love for him, in the sense that he's a fellow child of God. He's a fellow creature. I love him insofar as that. But I'm not as invested in him as I am in, like, my nephew, right? There's definitely a different level of investment there. And there ought to be a different level of investment there. If I cared about my little cousin or my nephew as much as I cared about that kid in the street, well, then I would either not care about my nephew or little cousin enough, or I would be way too invested in that kid on the street. Like, I would be crossing lines. Like, I'd be breaking boundaries there that his parents should set up and enforce, right? I show up to this kid's birthday, and they're like, who are you? I'm like, oh, I saw him walking on the street the other day. I thought I could come to his birthday party. Isn't that cool? No, that's not cool. So, okay. And when it comes to these kids that I see and they're invested in it, and I think, okay, what are the parents going to say to this kid when one night he realizes that he's going to die? Serious topic here, but let's talk about it for a second, okay? So you're 4, you're 5, you're 6, you're 8. You probably don't know that you're going to die. You probably encounter maybe things like dogs dying or some family members dying and things like this, and maybe at a very young age you don't really conceptualize that. The understanding is maybe just, well, they were here, now they're not. They're off somewhere else, right? They'll come back one day, they might not, I'm not sure, but they're not here anymore. Then maybe the conception is, it gets a bit more mature and you understand it more and go, okay, yeah, things live and then they die. And so that happens to people too, and that's something that happens. But at some point, you're going to realize it about yourself, that I am an example of that creature, that I'm living and breathing now, but one day that will have to stop. And I think that we have an instinctual resistance to that we want life, not death. And so that's going to be something that's scary. That's going to be something that's frightening, that's uncomfortable. And when you have I don't know, 7, 10, 11, how old are you when you first realize that you're going to die? I'm sure it happens to different people at different ages. But what are you going to do? Are you going to run into your mom and dad's room and say, I'm scared. What do I do? And mom and dad have to give you an answer. They have to. They got to say something. Or are they just going to look at you blankly and say nothing? Or they're going to say, don't worry about it, go to bed. Right? That's what I've been doing for 40 years. It's been working out for me, kid. Go for it. You'll be fine. Is that what you're going to say to your kid when he runs in, 8 years old, realize for the first time he's going to die? You're just going to say, don't worry about it, go to bed? Or are you going to say, don't worry, you go to Valhalla and you will drink mead with the gods? Or are you going to say, you're going to go to heaven? Or what are you going to, you got to say something. And if you just say nothing, just stare at him blankly, that's not going to be really encouraging for your kid now, is it? So the point here is that this is what William James, again, I have James in the mind now since I looked at the book. This is what James calls a forced decision. It's unavoidable. Actually, I think he uses the word unavoidable. Avoidable or unavoidable. This is an unavoidable decision. You have to decide here what you're going to do, how you're going to respond to your kid's question. There has to be some kind of response. Even no response is a kind of response, and it's a pretty poor one. So you can avoid this question for a long time. And I think that many of us do avoid this question for a long time. But at some point, it's going to come knocking on your door, and you got to decide, what am I going to say? Am I going to be courageous here and look my child in the eyes and give him an honest answer of what I believe? Or am I going to lie to him because I don't think that he'll like my answer? I think he'll be more scared. Am I going to lie to my own child? Or am I going to just dodge the question? I'm not going to give him a solid answer because I don't want him to see that his dad, let's say, hasn't really thought about this very important question in his life before because it scares him too. I don't know. You got to be the one to make that decision, and you will make that decision when that moment arrives. And C.S. Lewis has a good point about this. He says that there are moments when these kind of unavoidable things happen to us. So it might even be something like the person walking down the grocery aisle drops their grocery bag, and you're just far enough away on the other, like down the aisle, that if you go to help them, you know that you're going to get there at about the time that they're already maybe done cleaning up. Like it's going to take you a few seconds to get there, and by the time you get there, they're already going to be picking down, leaning over, picking up their own things. But you're also not so far away that it would be weird for you to go help them. Like you're not across the store, and you didn't see this from the other end of the store. You're in the same aisle, and you're the only two people in the aisle. And so do you decide to help the person or not, right? And let's suppose you decide not to, and then the person takes a bit longer to pick up their things than you would have thought because their back is hurting because they had, they got into a car accident that wasn't their fault 2 weeks ago and they're still healing. And so it's really difficult for them to pick these things up. And they don't want to ask for help because they're already embarrassed about, they used to be so fit and active and do all these things no problem, but now their back is hurting because of this stupid injury and they feel embarrassed to ask for help, but they're in a lot of pain and you didn't help them, right? And you kind of just pretend like you're in a hurry and you walk and you go into the next aisle because you just want to avoid that awkward situation. And then you start kicking yourself later for that. You go, man, I should have just helped that person out, right? They got up, their back was hurt, and I made the call not to help them. By the time I get to them, they would have picked everything up, anything already. I wanted to avoid the awkward interaction of showing up and them being done and be like, oh, sorry, I just wanted to help. But darn, I really wish I would have helped them, right? And then C.S. Lewis talks about that rationalization you go with. You go, well, it was a panic moment and it happened so quickly and I wasn't really thinking and like that's why I made the wrong choice, right? And Lewis says, yeah, but aren't those moments the moments that reflect who we are most clearly? Like the moments when we don't deliberate, the moments where we're not really weighing the pros and cons and doing the math, the moments where we just act spontaneously from our personalities, from who we are. Isn't that the most genuine, clear indication of who we really are? So we use that as an excuse as, darn it, like I was panicked, it was stressful, that's why I didn't do it. When Lewis goes, yeah, but aren't those spontaneous moments actually when we reveal who we most are, not who we least are, right? And so I forget why I'm telling you guys this story. I think it has something to do with when your kid asks you that question. It might be one of those moments, right? Where it's like, it was stressful. I didn't expect them to come running into my room at, 3 o'clock in the morning asking me what happens when you die, right? Like, but isn't the answer you give in that moment reflective of who you really are? Like, clearly? Because it's just, you're not thinking about it. You're not putting on any kind of a show. You're not putting on any kind of a mask. You're just being yourself, unfiltered, spontaneously, genuinely you. So what answer are you going to give? So it's something to think about. For my own part, I don't know how I arrived. I mean, if I were to give you my conversion story, it would take longer than this. One of the things that comes up with being a Christian is you get the argument from atheists, where atheists will say, well, yeah, of course you believe in heaven because you want to believe in heaven. It sounds great. Doesn't it sound amazing that when you die, you just get to go and experience perfect bliss for all eternity? So it's no surprise, then, that you're a Christian. And that argument only works. Two things I want to say. Number one, it only works with heaven, and it doesn't work with hell. So I know for a fact that there are some Christians who believe that there is only a heaven and there is no hell. And so they will look at Scripture, for example, which I find is fascinating because these are people who believe that Scripture, like the Bible, is the Word of God. And they believe that it is inerrant, meaning there are no mistakes. So it's like divinely inspired. Okay, so anything that's said there is true. So it's a reliable source. And in Scripture, I'm pretty sure the person who talks about hell the most, like who mentions the Hebrew word, would be I'm having a bad day today. For some reason, I can't remember. Gehenna, the fires of Gehenna, and going into the outer darkness and things like this. I'm pretty sure it's Jesus. Jesus mentions hell or suffering in the afterlife more than any other single person in Scripture. So how do you avoid that? I haven't looked into it. I'm really curious as to how a self-proclaimed Christian would read those statements if you deny the doctrine of hell. Like how do you make sense of those statements? What is Christ talking about? I don't know. I can think of a few ways that you could do some kind of exegetical gymnastics in your exegesis, gymnastics in your interpretation of Scripture. But I don't know for a fact. But so for those people, that objection might be a good one. You might say you only believe in heaven because you want there to be a heaven, and not because it actually exists, not because you have good reasons for it. But it doesn't work with serious Christians, especially like Catholics, for example, who believe in hell as well. Because that might say, okay, yeah, I believe in. Let's grant you that you're right. Let's just say that the reason I believe in heaven is because I want there to be heaven. Well, then why do I believe in hell? Because I want there to be hell for my enemies? Okay, but what about hell for me? Like, I don't want to go there, so why do I believe in it for me? Is it just because I have to maintain consistency so that there's a place for my enemies? Like, I don't know. That's one of my objections to that objection, or a reply to the objection, I guess. Another reply that I have is, yeah, but even if you're able to prove that the psychological reason why I believe in heaven and hell is because I want to believe in a nice place for me and my friends and a bad place for my enemies, that still doesn't answer the question of whether or not hell or heaven exists. Like, if there are 300 jelly beans in a jar and my favorite number is 272, and you ask me how many jelly beans are in that jar, and I look at it and I go, I don't know, 272. You say, why did you pick that number? I say, well, it looks like it's maybe somewhere around that number, and 272 is my favorite number. So I would like it. I want that number to be 272. Even if you're able to prove that the only reason why I said 272 was because of that reason I gave, well, it's my favorite number, still, how many jelly beans are in the jar? Me wanting there to be 272 jelly beans says nothing about whether or not there are actually 272 jelly beans in the jar. So similarly, even if the only reason why John Smith believes in heaven is because he wants there to be a heaven, well, okay, fine. Still, is there a heaven or is there not? You haven't answered the question. You've just attacked his psychology. You said, well, that's the only reason why you believe it is this. Okay, I don't think that's true. Even if it is true, so what? Can we get down to the question, please? Does heaven exist? Yes or no? You've avoided the question. The third thing I might say is you can turn it against the atheist. And you can say the only reason you disbelieve in heaven is because and hell is because you don't want there to be consequences in the afterlife. The thought of an afterlife and the thought of eternal consequences for your mistakes and your bad decisions here on earth scares the crap out of you. So you just decide to say, well, there's no heaven, there's no hell. You just cease to exist. Isn't that a lot more like no stress at that point? You can't get it wrong, you can't get it right. There's no worry. Nothing's going to happen to me after because I just cease to exist. So you could turn the psychological objection against them as well. Full well knowing, though, that at the end of the day, the psychological objection is exactly that, a psychological one. It's not a metaphysical one. It's not a philosophical one. You still haven't answered the question of whether or not there is an afterlife or what the nature of that afterlife is like if it does exist. So it's more of, I would even put it under the category of ad hominem. It's a logical fallacy. You're attacking me. You're not attacking my argument. You haven't even given an argument. Okay, so that's important to look at as well. For me, I would put myself in the same category as C.S. Lewis. When C.S. Lewis describes himself as, I think he calls himself the most reluctant convert in all of England. He might have said the whole world, but he considered himself to be one of the most reluctant converts to Christianity because he was an atheist and he looked at Christianity and he just couldn't deny it anymore. He said, the truth of this thing is too overwhelming. I can't ignore it. It must be true. And he didn't like that because that meant that there were all sorts of things that he would have to give up. And that meant there were all sorts of things he would have to do that he didn't want to give up and that he didn't want to do. But he knew he had to if he was going to say this is the truth. I would put myself in the same category as Lewis in that I was a rather reluctant convert to Christianity. When I had my conversion experiences, I plot them on a graph, there would be multiple. I didn't really want to. I mean, there's, of course, parts of me that wanted to, because there's the part that wants to seek the truth and believe in the truth. And there's the part that there are good things, about lots and lots of good things about Christianity, about Catholicism, and you want those good things. So heaven would be an example of one of the reasons why it's good to believe in heaven. Better to believe in that than to believe in annihilation, let's say, right? However, there are also many, many, many things I had to give up, still have to give up, and many, many things I have to do that I don't want to do. They're painful, they're difficult, they require patience and all kinds of other stressful testing virtues, etc. And it would be so much easier if I could just avoid all those things. But the conversion had to happen for me because I already had a pre-conversion commitment to following the truth. And this is something that I don't know if you can just boil it down to my temperament, perhaps, just a personality trait that I have that's been there since who knows. But the fact is, just as a simple matter of fact, that I like knowing the truth of a thing. And I believe that whatever the truth is, that's what you should follow. That's what you should believe, even if it's like horrifyingly repulsive. So for instance, I don't like the conception of God that Islam has. Now, you might object and say that my conception of Islam is misinformed, and I'm open to that. I hope that my conception of Islam is misinformed. I really honestly do, because my current conception of Islam has things in there that are like absurdly wrong, just wrong, that I think like, why would God want that? So for instance, one example might be something like God awarding you 72 virgins in heaven. So I'm pretty sure this isn't something from the Quran. I'm pretty sure this is something from the Hadith. So therefore, one of the writings attributed to Muhammad that aren't part of the Quran, but still regarded with great authority. And depending on which Islamic sect you're talking about, because there's just not one kind of Christian. There isn't just one kind of Muslim. Some Muslims would say that that's totally reliable and that it's totally true that you're going to get a certain number of virgins in heaven if you are a good, solid Muslim in your life on earth, right? That seems totally wrong to me. That there's like a kind of, divine prostitution, and I don't like the thought of Allah handing out women like they're mere objects for my pleasure, and not even just in like a temporal realm, but like for all eternity. Doesn't sit well with me. And then there's also a I'm really stressing on my words here. Oh my gosh. Polygamous, thank you. There's a polygamous tinge to that, of course, as well, right? One guy, 72 wives. I mean, not okay with that either. That doesn't seem fair to the 72 wives, and it seems gross for the one man. How greedy and, lustful are you that you need 72? Are you kidding me? So, problems there. But if that's the case, if that's the truth, if what we're supposed to all do is we're all supposed to be good Muslims, and then if you're a man and you're a good Muslim, then when you get to heaven or paradise, whatever, you have 72 virgins given to you, then I'll believe it. I don't want that to be the truth, but if that's the truth, then I'll believe it, because I want to believe whatever the truth is. So I had that commitment, and let me say this very clearly. I don't think that's the truth, and I think I have good arguments to demonstrate that's not the truth. I don't believe that Islam is correct about so much of what it says, especially its most fundamental claims. Otherwise, I would be a Muslim, right? I remember there was a debate between Charles Hickens. Hitchens? Oh boy, today's a weird day. You're gonna get a lot of mistakes in this podcast, more than usual. Christopher Hitchens, not even Charles. I went from Charles Hickens to Christopher Hitchens. So, Christopher Hitchens was one of the four horsemen of the new atheism. You had let's see if I can get them. Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, and Daniel Dennett. And these were the four horsemen of the new atheism. Christopher Hitchens passed away from cancer a few years ago. But he was in a debate with, I believe, William Lane Craig, who is a Protestant Christian theologian, philosopher. And Hitchens asked him at one point in the debate, well, do you believe that Muslims are wrong about this idea? And I forget what they were debating exactly, but it was something. I don't know. But he said, do you believe Muslims are wrong about this? And Hitchens said, Craig said, yes, I do. He said, yeah, I believe that Muslims are wrong about this point, whatever the point was. And Hitchens says, well, that's quite a lot of people. And then William Lane Craig didn't quite hear him. He said, excuse me, pardon me? He said, that's quite a lot of people. That's like almost a billion people. And William Lane Craig just kept going on with the debate, and they both got back to the debate after that. But I thought to myself, okay, yeah, but Hitchens, you're an atheist. So obviously you disagree with the Muslims too. So you're also disagreeing with quite a lot of people. And I thought, what a weird objection to lay against a guy that also applies to yourself. Seems so odd to me. So I have no problem saying that almost a billion people are wrong about a certain point. Am I saying that everything in Islam is false? No, that's absurd. But am I saying that there are many serious, important things in Islam, even fundamental and foundational things about Islam that I think are patently false? Yes, and I have no problem saying that. So anyways, but I'm also, in principle, as a philosopher, open to being misinformed about those things, and I'm open to having my mind changed. So I think it would take an incredible amount of argument, and it would have to be a very convincing argument, because I think I have a lot of good convincing arguments on the other side, right? But if you're able to refute those arguments that I have and give me more convincing arguments on the other hand, then I'll go join a mosque and I'll become a Muslim, no problem, if that's what the truth is. I just don't think that it is, and thank God for that, because it's not only do I think it's not the truth, I also don't want it to be the truth. And I've already made the distinction between my desires and the truth itself. I've already made it clear that despite what I like and dislike, what I want or don't want, that is secondary to the truth of a thing. In fact, it has nothing to do with the truth of a thing. It might have something to do with my belief in what the truth is, yes, why I believe in certain things, why I disbelieve in other things, but it has nothing to do with the thing itself. This is also known as the genetic fallacy, or maybe the genetic fallacy is a form of this. I think that, here we go, another name I got to remember today. Let's see if I can get it. Let's see if I can just sit here and think really hard and find this guy's name. His name was Dinesh D'Souza. Boom! So Dinesh D'Souza mentions the genetic fallacy, where he says, you're more likely to believe in gravity if you live in New York than if you live in New Delhi or New Guinea, let's say, right? Also, you're more likely to believe in the theory of relativity if you grew up and live in Oxford, England, than if you live in Oxford, Missouri. Now, what does that say about the truth of the theories of gravity and relativity? Absolutely nothing. Because just because you believe in a certain thing, because that's how you were raised to believe in that thing, or that's what you were taught, or that's what the people in your area tend to believe, says nothing about the truth value of that thing in itself. And so many times I hear from people, another example of the genetic fallacy would be, you're only a Christian because you grew up with a Christian family, or because your parents were Christian, or because you went to a Christian school, or because you're from a Christian country, or something like this. And that person's only Muslim because they come from a Muslim country, etc. Like, look at the stats. India, overwhelmingly Hindu. The Middle East, overwhelmingly Muslim. China, overwhelmingly Buddhist. Like, duh, the only reason they believe these things is because that's where they grew up. Now, what do we do with that information? On the one hand, you might want to debate the statistics. You might want to say, well, actually, there are more Christians and things there than you think, and there are more atheists and more agnostics, whatever than you think. You could do that. But at the end of the day, you could say, okay, so let's suppose that 86% of Chinese people are Buddhist. What does that say about the truth of Buddhism? Nothing. If you want to know whether or not Buddhism is true, like the doctrines and teachings and beliefs of Buddhism, if we can even talk about Buddhism in that way, organized Buddhist religions, let's say, if you want to know whether those things are true, you don't hold a survey. Just like if you want to know how far is the moon from the Earth, you don't go ask people on the street, on the sidewalk. That information that you get from that survey will tell you what people think about the distance between the Earth and the moon. It'll tell you what people believe about how far away the moon is from the Earth. It won't tell you how far away the moon is from the Earth. If you want to know how far away the moon is from the Earth, you get a long tape measure and you measure it. Or you're smarter than me and you get like a laser and you measure the time it takes for the light to get back or something like that. You don't go ask people on the sidewalk. So if it comes down to a question of the afterlife or religions, the truth of religions or something, you don't do a poll to find out the answer to that question. That's a question of objective truth, and so we have to get down, you have to measure it. And how do you measure whether or not heaven exists? Well, you don't use a laser, you use philosophy, you use theology, metaphysics, something like this. I think that I could spend another hour talking about the afterlife. So let me do this. I'm going to leave this here now because I'm already at an hour in my recording. I'll have to edit it down a bit. It might be just below an hour, but it's longer than I want it to be already. So I'll post this as episode 4. I'll do something else for episode 5. And if you guys want an afterlife discussion part 2, I'll do it as episode 6. If you don't care, you've had enough, then we'll leave it. So I'll leave it to you if you've listened to the end of this podcast. You can decide. Episode 5 will do something else, so don't worry about next episode. Episode 6 will be Afterlife Part 2 if you want it. If not, we'll end it here. But as far as this podcast is concerned, I'm ending it here. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed. Please do comment on the video, send me a message, whatever, if you want me to talk about anything, if you have any comments, feedback, suggestions, etc. And I will certainly take those into account. Thank you so much for listening. Like I said, thank you to everybody who gave me the positive feedback in previous podcasts, and I will see you next time. Enjoy your day. My name is Austin. Stay classy.